Haya.
Do we have a lawyer?
Haya. Gabriel. Gabriel.
Nerima is at the corner here, traffic.
So, we'll just start 10 minutes late. Yeah?
Hiyo haita Nerima.
I have. That's what I'm using now. Amesema inaonekana? Ngoja wachana naye tu kwanza. Angekuwa ameshai nini?
Mimi nakwambia if you don't get rich 2022 you won't be rich. The money available for campaign is so much. Yeah, if you want to buy look like nakwambia hii kitu inaitwa BBI. Unajua the ruling inatoka August. Because hapa implementation again ni Supreme Court. At the time they are thinking again, we are in 2022 January. Tushaanza kampeni, kuna mtu anasikiza.
Ana join immediately.
Nani?
Nakwambia ana join.
So they won't even
CS, Ministry of Public Service.
when you need to speak or anything, then you have to ask a question or say something, please stand up so the camera can capture you.
And introduce yourself.
Yes, and introduce yourself. There's a microphone for the audience, which will be distributed by Monique. She'll take care of that. Yes, where are my panelists?
Give it to Ivy first.
Machama, you look here, want to start?
Saizi, tumpe tu saizi. African. Is it African or Africa?
Africa.
Youth Leadership Forum, eh? You know, there's a video of Monique correcting one of the journalists. It's not African. It's Africa.
There is a video.
You have not seen that correctly in a document asking you, what is this?
It's Africa. Do the link.
Do you, Anto, do you have a picture of Nerima? Okay.
Who is sitting there? Someone will have a green mic up on the
So, Mchama, even when you call someone to answer question, you have to start.
I don't know. I don't know. I think Antoa said you stand. Philip, what does anyone... You have 2 degrees? Yes. Ish.
say something.
Say something, Muchama. Welcome everyone to this month's event. We are really glad to be here. We are at the Harry Heights Apartments, and I'm joined with an amazing panel. And this month we're actually talking about in setting the agenda of a nation. And we'll just be focusing on the rule of law. And sit back, enjoy. I have an amazing audience, an amazing panel. And maybe just to start with the introduction, I'll start online. We have Honorable Beatrice Elachi, and as we know, Beatrice Elachi is the Chief Administrative Secretary in the Ministry of Public Service and Gender, supporting the Cabinet Secretary in running the ministerial programs. Honorable Beatrice Elachi will go down in history as the only woman serving as the Nairobi County Speaker, and also as the Majority Chief Whip in the Senate. So karibu sana, Honorable Beatrice Elachi. Right here, starting with the ladies, I have Ms. Nerima Wako. Ms. Nerima Wako is a political analyst who serves as the Executive Director at Siasa Place. Siasa Place engages young Kenyans, educating them about the constitution, governance, and electoral processes through community engagements and social media. What people don't know about Nerima Wako is she hates badly done documents. Yeah, so for that, Nerima, again, karibu sana.
Thank you.
And another person on my panel is Philip Langat, popularly known as Wakili. Philip has his first degree in political science, economics, and has done law as his second degree. Philip is now cutting his niche at the McDonald and Company, and he has done extensive work in constitutionalism and has been involved with the media on media independence and the judiciary. And lastly on my panels is Charles Malika. And Charles Malika is a political scientist, researcher, and he has mastered the art of political science and public administration. Charles has specialized in electoral processes and is keen on the judiciary advocates for good governance. Charles' career, if you look at it, shows that he is a local Nambale servant, but also with a global mindset, and is keen on devolution. So, and today, as we look at the role of the judiciary on the basis of the rule of law, we'll be looking at the past, present, and future. So maybe just to get the basis right, Philip or Wakili, could you just define for us the meaning of the rule of law and how the legal profession defines it?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting us into this particular event. Indeed, it is a very germane event in light of the happenings across the country. It is very important for us to see the role of the judiciary vis-a-vis what is currently taking place in this country. So maybe just to define what the rule of law is, the rule of law is basically, a society that is under the constitution, or rather this, the rules and regulations that have been set up by the legislative institutions or the policy makers. Basically, is a society which is subservient to the law and a society that observes the law, each and every day. And just to go a little bit further, I would want to say that when you talk about the role of judiciary in setting up the agenda of the country, we look at the three facets of life. We look at the political, we look at the social, and also the economic facets of life, and ask ourselves the basic question: how has the judiciary influenced those facets of life? And that is something that I'll be discussing about going forward. But just to answer your question, is that the rule of law is just a society that basically lives under the law. Yeah.
Charles, what do you think about the definition of the rule of law?
Okay, thank you. I think I would have a philosophical understanding or approach of the same so that we get the wider view.
Okay.
So you find that the rule of law should be coined from the prospects of the founding fathers, and that is Plato and his student Aristotle. Mm-hmm. So they coined the rule of law as a moral code within a society that works for the common good. Common good in the sense that every individual, the government apparatus are subject to that law, and that they can be judged by the same law in an equal accord. Okay. So that nobody, no individual, no government instrument is above the other when actually basing on the law.
So when I hear Nerima on the streets, or I see Nerima on the streets saying that no one is above the law, then that is what actually the rule of law means. Is that correct, Nerima?
Yeah, that's what it means in theory, but it doesn't mean that in Kenya.
Okay.
It's applied to certain individuals, and mainly individuals who don't have money. Here, the rule of law seems to be able to change goalposts. And I think the definition of law, I'm not a lawyer on this panel, we should say that clearly. I think that we have come to a place where we can almost utilize the law to our advantage, instead of a protection for all people, the public. Yeah.
That is very sad, Nerima.
Yes, it's sad.
How has that affected you? How has that affected you in the past? Because we have seen you on the streets.
Yeah.
How has that affected you in the past?
It bothers me a lot. It makes me concerned. It makes me worried, because I do feel that in the beginning, it came from a good place. Even when we talk about our constitution and how they came about to building it and how the different stakeholders groups were involved. Okay. So we like to repeat how progressive this constitution is, just because of the number of individuals and sectors that were involved in putting it in place. Okay. But what makes me afraid, very afraid, is the fact that people have manipulated the rule of law. Even right now, we cannot ignore the fact that there's a huge court case happening at the moment. And we have over, I think it's Waikwa who put it on his Twitter, where, the president or Raila, certain people are represented by up to 60 lawyers that the public is going to fund. Yeah. But then the lawyers defending the public are working pro bono. So it just shows you that in our country, to use the law to protect you, you have to have the resources to be able to utilize that law. And it's unfair. It should be free to all and accessible to all.
Okay, and maybe let me come back to Charles. Has that, looking at the past, has that been what has been happening, or the judiciary was different back then? And we can go back as far as 1965, when we were looking at session paper number 10, and we had only 3 things to worry about. One was eradication of poverty, diseases and what is the other one?
I think it's something to do with education, but let me not take. I think you are getting out of track.
Tell me.
Kenya gained independence in 1963, isn't it?
Okay.
We are talking of self-rule.
Okay.
To the effect that now we are independent to a level that we can do things not coerced by the external forces. But unfortunately, I cannot say the judiciary as such was in a place to advocate for the rule of law or for the rights of the people. Why? The executive arm of government was so powerful after the Moi era actually did away with the bicameral government that was there after independence, to a level that the executive was so powerful, to a level that even the president himself appointed the judges.
Okay.
He could uphold what we call the presidential decree. Presidential decree means the executive arm of the government has got so much powers that it cannot be corrected by the common mwananchi or the common apparatus of government. Tell me what happens when you choose judges who can still apprehend you in that court of law, not apprehend you, or judge you in that court of law. They cannot make a ruling because they understand the origin of the sin. When these judges are making a ruling, actually, you find that they'll be subject to what happened, what John Rawls calls the origin of the sin, that before you make a ruling, what informs what are the consequences? So a judge could not make something or make a ruling independently as such, because he would actually face the law in courts. He would be subject to the maxims of power from the president of the executive arm of the government. So what I can say is that the judiciary was not independent as such. And to that effect, okay, the rule of law could not be upheld because it's the same judiciary which interprets the law to these people, so that the rule of law is applied to them. So it was not independent as such.
Okay, so what Charles is saying, that in the past the judiciary was not independent, and that it is what it is, right?
Exactly.
Tell me.
I mean, I would like to add something what Charles has said regarding the judiciary, the role that judiciary played under the repealed constitution. You know very well that under the repealed constitution, if you look at Article 23 of the repealed constitution, it vested power on the parliament. The legislative power was vested in the parliament. Under Article 30, the executive power was vested in the president. But there is not a single article under the repealed constitution that vested any power in the judiciary. You understand? So it means the role of the judiciary was limited, both in terms of resources and even in terms of a clear provision in the constitution. There was not a clear provision in the constitution that said, now this is the role of the judiciary. So as was Charlie say, as you were saying, the judiciary therefore was subservient, and actually it was treated as if it was an arm of the civil service and not an equal arm of the government. And I can give several examples of cases which actually went to the Supreme Court. I mean, the courts then, but they were not successful. We have had, for example, 6 election petitions in this country. And most of them, if you look at under the repealed constitution, they never really got the light of the day because of simple things. For example, if you remember the case of Mwai Kibaki versus Moi, it was thrown out of court because Mwai Kibaki was not able to serve Moi as a president, even despite the fact that he had actually served him through what we call a service by through the Gazette notice. So you look at some of those trivialities and you realize that indeed the judiciary was playing a very minor role. Unlike today, now under the current constitution, where the judiciary is more vibrant, is more emboldened, and it has really come in to fill the void that was left by the civil service, and also the void that has been left by the opposition. You know, in this country, and this is something that is known to the public, when the Prime Minister decided to shake hands with the President, it spelled doom on the opposition of this country, and therefore we don't have an opposition. So, and also we don't have a civil service that is vibrant. Okay, you cannot compare the current civil service with the civil service that we had in the 90s, All right. So that one is also another issue that is emerging, and I could say that is where also the judiciary is trying to fill those voids that have been left by those particular institutions, the opposition and the civil society. So I agree with Charles that indeed before the current constitution there was a limited role of the judiciary. Unlike today where we see a very vibrant judiciary, the judiciary is biting. And I would want to come back to that again in regards to the way media has been reporting about the judiciary. Exactly.
Nerima, the gentlemen seem to agree. Looking at the judiciary in the past, what's your view? Where did the reign start beating us? Where did that change? And if you look at the different eras, how do you compare without coming to the present?
From where I sit, I believe you're talking about the civil society.
Exactly.
From where I sit, if we even look at the likes of William Tunga, he was an activist in the 90s. Kivutha Kibwana. I mean, a lot of these individuals who are now in government were civil society. So the transition has come into where now they're actually in the arms of government. And that's where the reign started to beat us, where when they were youth, they were fighting for these particular matters. The church was very involved. Right now, the church is not involved within our politics, or they don't want to be in matters that are too controversial, and they're also used as a stamping tool and a stamping kit. So what we forget to realize is that the 90s, yes, had opposition, but the civil society played such a major role in coming up with certain policies. Even when we talk about multipartism, the fact that it's civil societies who led those certain campaigns and came up with certain policies and bills and pushed for the repeal, Section 2. That is important to recognize, that these people played that role. Right now, that role has left a gap. Because now when these individuals now use those as platforms to enter government, and then we have a gap because we have young activists such as myself, with a gap where there's no mentorship when it comes to how do we fight these things, because going to the street doesn't work anymore.
It doesn't work, yeah.
Right now it's the courts. So even when people are fighting for issues in this country, the first thing they do is go to the courts. Even when we look at our elections, we had hundreds of petitions when people were fighting certain issues that they felt happened within the counties that were not just. So youth have to understand to use petitions. Another thing, youth no longer mobilize according to universities. The Universities Amendment Act, the Duale Bill, it has come and completely changed how young people organize within the university. A lot of student leaders, they're the ones who enter politics. They become national leaders. So now if they don't practice on campus, they're not mobilizing students, if they're not fighting for certain rights or, you know, activities or things on campus, then how are they practicing to become politicians? They're not. They're not. So you're not going to find university students fighting for a particular issue together as they used to do in the 90s. So the dynamics have completely changed. The challenges are very different because right now people are using online mechanisms to be able to fight for particular issues which was not there in the 90s. And people are using the courts, which they couldn't do in the 90s because they've already explained that most of the judges belonged to Moi, or the leader of the day.
Interesting. Charles?
Yeah. Yes.
Go ahead.
I think I have to add something on what she has just said there. I really want to capture the civil society. I think considering it being the gap between the government and the people, I think that gap is what called the civil society, isn't it? I think among the civil society constituents, we have the social movements, interest groups, and political parties per se. But you find that political parties are the only institutions with the guarantee of forming a government as such. So we should expect to see political parties, just to add on what she has said, to see political parties fighting for the interest of the common mwananchi as such. Based on the Western world, look at the Republicans, the Democrats. You see, it's not an issue of governance as such. It's the issue of what agenda are you bringing on board? how much is you as a party fighting for the common man, what we call the Wanjiku or something, isn't it? So what she has just said, I have to add something on it and say that political parties in Kenya will be on the forefront for the agitation for the rights of the people, because it's an interest agitation organ. But today, what are we seeing? That political parties are not playing the parts they used, the role they used to play. Right now, we talk of lobby groups. Do we have them? Do we have social movements to act? Do we have them? But then, how vibrant are they? If they are vibrant, how much are they supported by these courts? If they've got an agenda, how much are the courts willing, based on their supremacy, to advocate for their rights? So once you find a state whose the civil society is not working, yeah, we may have interest groups, we may have political parties, we may have interest groups, faith-based organizations, as he has said. But you see, when they are null and void, they are not agitating fully. Not because they do not want, they may be willing to do so, but do they have the support of the government? A government where maybe we can say the executive has suppressed the judiciary which is supposed to interpret the constitution so that these social movements are able to be informed by the law and work within the prospects of the law so that they achieve their agenda.
Great. Philip, are we putting so much pressure on the judiciary? Or what do you think?
I wouldn't say that we are putting so much pressure in the judiciary. Actually, for me, the judiciary for the first time is coming out to play the role that it ought to play. Remember, as I've said earlier, we are coming from a scenario called judicial restraint, where the judges are supposed to rubber stamp the status quo. The judges are supposed to agree with the executive. The judges are supposed not to open a can of worms, so to speak. But having said that, we have transformed tremendously from that scenario which I'm calling judicial restraint to where we are now, to a situation which we are calling judicial activism. All right, and judicial activism is not a foreign concept. It is there. It is in other jurisdictions. If you look at the USA, you will find judicial activism. Even here, locally, we find judicial activism anchored in the law, the Constitution, under Article 259, Sub-Article 1C, which says that the Constitution must be interpreted in a manner that seeks to develop that law. You understand? So in as much as we want to interpret the Constitution, we must interpret the Constitution in a manner that can even advance that particular Constitution more. So it gives the judges and the officers of the court a latitude to bring or to expand, to go into areas that they had previously had limited accesses. So I don't think there is so much pressure in the judiciary. What I think is the judiciary is playing a perfect role. I'll give an example of the case between Miguna and Fred Matiang'i. That case is in the public domain, where the courts actually asked the Director of Immigration and the Inspector General of Police and Matiang'i himself to compensate Miguna. So that is a perfect example where the court is coming to intervene on human rights. All right, where the court is saying, well, this person's rights have been violated and therefore he needs to be compensated. Also, on the other hand, this is a situation where the courts are demotivating public servants who are filled with a lot of power. The reason why we have a judiciary actually is because we want to check the excesses of the executive, because the executive has got a lot of power at its disposal. The executive can even decide to bring violence. It has the monopoly of violence. The executive has got a lot of resources which the judiciary does not have, and therefore such instances where we see the judiciary coming in to intervene is what I will call a very tremendous the role that the judiciary ought to be playing. I'll give another example as I wrap up, so that at least I can give my fellow panelists a chance also to make their contribution. The case of the Dadaab case, where the executive gave an order saying that refugees must be repatriated back to their country. I remember the executive order to that effect, but then what happened? The courts came in and said, no, repatriation of refugees must be voluntary, and even if there is such repatriation has to be piecemeal and not instantly. So that is also another instant where the court is coming in to safeguard what I call basic human rights and socio-economic rights. Because remember, these are marginalized people who are here seeking shelter in this country, and without the courts, I mean, their lives could have been jeopardized. So that is also another role which I feel the judiciary is not new. It is not under any pressure. It is just play its role. Yeah, its fundamental role.
Before I can see Ivy raising her hand in the audience. But let me ask Nerima, I like the way you took us through from Willy Mutunga, and is there things that the judiciary did in the past that actually stood out for you and said, you know what, where we are heading is the right one, is the right direction? Is there something that stood out for you, whether in the different eras?
I don't know. Let me go back to that because it might be controversial.
I would love controversy in this class, no? Tell me.
Let me think on that one, Duncan.
Okay. Let me go to the audience. Ivy. Ivy is a young lady who we sent to the UK to study and just see the difference between the UK and Kenya. Ivy, how do you define the rule of law and how does it compare in Kenya and in the UK?
Okay, thank you, Michao, for the question. So, as the panelists have rightly defined the rule of law, I mean, we have rightly defined it, but maybe a simpler definition would just be, okay, a layman's definition would be knowledge of the law and obedience of the law. It has certain tenets, including clarity of the law, supremacy of the law, equality before the law, and accountability to the law. So if I were to compare the UK and Kenya, I would say basically where we are lacking in comparison is in terms of clarity, where you find most Kenyans are unaware of most laws that actually apply to them, and accountability, especially amongst our leaders. And a good example, our most recent one that I've just remembered right now is the case of Matt Hancock in the UK, and his resignation because he knows that he has broken a law which applies to all people in the UK and him as a leader regardless of his position. So I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, you have. Thank you.
Okay,
So much.
thank you.
And as I come back to the panel and back to Nerima.
Yeah. So for me, I think the case that stood out to me the most is not even a long time ago. It has to be the annulment. Okay. That one made history. Okay. But I think the one when it comes to social issues was the case of the schoolgirl because of her religion, Rastafarian, and she was wearing the headgear to school, and the court actually was able to support her. I think those are things that might seem very minute, but they are a very big deal because it still goes back to people feeling protected no matter what religion or class that you belong to, and being able to run to the courts to support you for that. But for the past, I don't know.
In the past, you don't know.
Allow me just to add on what she has said. She has said that the case of this Rastafarian, I think that is one area of life I would call the social aspect of life. That is a very important, it might look minute, but already we saw that the judiciary was actually setting an agenda. Because after that, people started asking themselves, what about other people who have different views, different religious beliefs, and so forth and so on. Another aspect which is closely related to that issue of Rastafarianism is, you remember this particular judge is called Said Chitembwe, who ruled that he actually acquitted a man, a 24-year-old who had raped a 13-year child. I mean, statutorily, a 13-year-old is not supposed to provide consent, you know, in as far as sex is concerned. But then, when he was asked, because he was interviewing for the Court of Appeal judges, he said, you know, if a child or that particular girl is acting in a manner to suggest that she knows what exactly she's getting into, and you know, and in that particular case, this lady used to go to the to the house with this man, and she seems to have understood what was taking place. All right. Then in that aspect, the courts really need to look at. All right, to look at. I know this is a very controversial topic, but that is the essence of it. All right, that is the essence. That is why we're having these discussions, right? So it is at that instant that Said Chitembwe said that if a lady behaves in a manner to suggest that she knows what she's getting into, then really the issue of consent cannot arise, even if she's younger than 18 years. All right, and that is what I like about the discourses that we are having, because right now we are asking ourselves, should we reduce the age of consent from 18 to 16, or should we maintain it? So I think the agenda of the society is there from a social perspective. The agenda is already there. People are grappling with that issue. Some are saying no, it should remain at 18. Some are saying no, it should come down to, because actually there is a survey. There is a survey that shows that 15% of Kenyan women actually, gave birth before they reached the age of 18. So meaning these people were exposed to sexual intercourse even before the age of 18. These are real issues. These are survey. These are scientific and empirical issue that has been the scientists have come up with. So that is also another way in which I look at and say, indeed, the judiciary is setting the agenda. In as far as that social aspect of life is concerned, the judiciary is really setting an agenda there. Yeah.
National conversation.
Exactly, because everyone now is talking about the age. The age, just as much as we are talking about Rastafarians and their rights, we are also talking about the age of consent, which is a very pertinent.
I can see her.
Yeah, because I'm
ahead.
burning.
Yeah.
So we are basically talking about predators and their rights. Because frankly speaking, we're talking about power dynamics.
Okay.
Power dynamics. Right here, I'm the only woman on this panel right now presently.
One is online.
She's online.
Yeah.
I'm talking about right here.
Yeah.
Both the men beside me have decided to add on to my point.
Okay.
I've not added to any of theirs, but they feel I need assistance.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
This is cultural. It's very cultural. And also the fact that she may appear to know what she was doing, it is taught. A child doesn't just wake up and know what sex is and decide to engage in sex. It is a taught habit. It is a mannerism. It is not just natural. We have to have these conversations with our children. This is a child.
Yeah.
So that's why that discussion is very heated. Because what we're not discussing is how do we have young girls protected better. If there's a man who's having continuous relationships with underage girls, shouldn't he be on some database for predators? Isn't that a conversation that we should be having? That these girls are actually being raped. It's not that something that she loves to do and she feels like doing, because sometimes also...
Or she even gave consent.
Yeah,
for that matter,
I mean,
she's
how
13-year-old.
do you disagree with a man
Okay.
who's older than you, who knows more than you, and you as your child, you come here and you say, I know, be that thing.
So Nerima, let me ask, and before I move to Charles, what do you think now? Where does the judiciary comes in? Because today we're focusing on the judiciary. What is your expectation on the judiciary on such a heated argument? Should the
It's the
judiciary just come
debates
and...
that he's mentioned,
Okay,
where people are now talking about the clauses between the ages. What are they calling it? The Romeo and Juliet, where if they are within the same age group, then that is negotiable. They can now discuss and figure it out.
Yeah,
So they're trying to create the ranges of where this issue can sort of arise. That's where the judiciary comes in, where we're feeling, let's protect some. But when we leave it open like that, there are people who will take advantage of that gap. Yeah.
Okay, Charles.
Yeah.
In Nambale, how do they relate to the judiciary and in such issues?
I think society as it is has got different perspectives of maybe approaching and understanding things. Okay, we've got things as my fellas, the lady and the gentleman has just said. It really depends on how you people or the society approaches the law. If you think this is morally right and as per the Constitution, however, we must consider the age, actually, as she puts it. A 13-year-old girl, actually, when you call such a girl, actually, she will definitely agree and consent. So you go ahead and do whatever you want, yeah.
So what I'm getting at is now at the lowest level of the society, whether it's at the family or whether it's at the county level, do they understand that?
Yeah, they understand. Let me tell you.
Okay.
It really matters to this level, that what we call a settled culture, a political culture of a given society or a country. People understand the law, but someone says that laws are there to be violated. So they know, someone stealing knows very much well that I'm bound by the law, not to do what, to steal, but goes ahead to steal. So this fella committing a rape case, a rape act over this young girl actually is aware. Is very much aware. So what we need to do through the courts is that we have to, people should come up with bylaws, the parliamentarian should come up with what we call the government-made laws, statutes, isn't it? To safeguard the rights of the girl child. Although today they say the boy child should also be brought on board, but the girl child is very vulnerable. You can imagine a girl who cannot defend herself actually through the court of law or is being suppressed, as they put it. So the courts have to come in and really focus on it. The implementation of these court cases should be done to the letter. We have to probe. I heard someone talk of pro bono or something, isn't it? I'm not a legal expert, but I know such fella does not have someone to support him or her in the adjudication of the case. Yeah. So the courts should come on board and bring such people to act and defend, or rather fight for the rights of such young girls. Actually, it's very astonishing for a girl that in case she was aware of the act, then she should just know. To me, I think that's very immorality of the highest order.
Okay. Let me go back to Philip, and I'm seeing some raised hands in the audience. I'll come to you. But Philip, yes. Are these laws existent? Have they been handled before, so that we put a close to that discussion?
Which laws exactly?
Especially protecting, I like how Nerima put it at first when she was saying that there are some laws protecting the predators. Is that the case in law?
Definitely. I mean, this is something, it is not new. We have the Sexual Offences Act. We have, I think we also have the Penal Code. But majorly the Sexual Offences Act, which prescribes the punishments for those people who might get into sexual relationships with minors, or those people who might sexually assault, either gender. So, to answer your question, we already have that. We have a Sexual Offences Act which is very active, but then there are some instances that the courts have given a different opinion. Instead of sentencing these people who are accused of committing sexual offenses, the courts have actually invited, they have given attention to the circumstances in which these sexual offenses were perpetrated. And the case that I've given is very much illustrative. Yeah, we have a Sexual Offence Act, but then we are looking at the situation in which this alleged sexual offense took place. There is a man, there is a girl, she's 13 years old, but she knows what she has been doing. She has not even done it once. She has been visiting this boyfriend, and she knows. And even during the what we call taking of evidence, the girl says clearly that, yeah, this is my boyfriend, and in fact, I'm even planning to marry this boyfriend. So those are some of the instances where the courts now invoke. The courts come in to say this relationship does not amount to sexual offenses, and therefore we acquit this person. So, in as much as we have a law that is the Sexual Offences Act, we must evaluate each and every sexual offense. each and every case on a case-to-case basis. All right. There are some cases that will qualify to be punished. There are some that have to be really looked at. But just to move away from that, because I've seen my
back to the audience first. Okay. Let me throw it back to the audience. Eunice, you have worked with the Emerging Leaders Foundation, and just you have been in the nooks and crooks of all these things. What's your thoughts on this?
First of all, I'd love to say that we did a multi-stakeholder meeting, and it was bringing together the judiciary, the education sector, psychologists, and even the church to be able to find the solution for that remark that the CJ then had given, that the age of consent should be lowered. And after that, there was a report that was given by NGEK, and I thought that issue came to an end. But then again, I see it coming up. And one of the things I would like to say is that opening up the Sexual Offences Act will really be detrimental to our girls and boys as well. But mostly our girls, because always the girl is on the losing end. And what I mean is, even when you look at the net enrollment in the education sector, for girls, it's lower than boys. And this is because there are even initiatives that have come up, like the initiative for the Basic Education Act, which was actually put into law, but then again is not being implemented as it ought to. And one of the things that are in the Basic Education Act is to give sanitary towels to every girl who goes to school. But then again, that is not being implemented as it ought. So even as we talk about this Sexual Offences Act, we need to look at the systemic issues that bring all these things into play. We cannot just look at one aspect of the society and say, let's open up this exactly. So I think it's very important to look at the wholesome development of a girl and a boy and realize that there are a lot of things that come into play when we are talking about these things. And we cannot just look at it from one angle. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunice. I want to bring in the CAS, Honorable Beatrice Elachi. Karibu sana, Mheshimiwa. What are your thoughts on this? We have just picked one aspect of how the judiciary or the courts interpreted one aspect of the law, and we are still, it is evident from the discussion that we have had that there is still confusion. What is your take on all this? What is the role of the judiciary in setting the agenda in a country?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And I just want to thank our young leaders who indeed are today panelists and even those in the audience. And just to say this, I think it's always good, and that is why we used to follow so much before. You would appreciate the role of a parent, first of all, before I get into the judiciary, because I was just listening to that conversation, that there was time, the days when a parent was not just your parent, that a parent was a parent as long as the child is within a neighborhood and the community, that parent is responsibility to take care of you, and the other parent will appreciate that my child, wherever she is or he is, there is a parent who can take care of. But as parents decided and we felt it is for me to discipline my child, and therefore we will always have challenges of, first of all, even if I see a child of so and so in a group that I feel that this is not right, we've reached a point, you are saying, this is just not my child. But you see, those days, that is why if we had curbed such crisis where you have adolescents in crisis, young people in crisis, why? Any parent will take care of you at that. But now let us come to the judiciary when you're setting the pace for the country, which I believe within the new constitution, that is what Kenyans wished, and it is their spirit and laughter that the judiciary would have taken over to guide the country whenever the two other arms of government would try and bring the country to another level that is not right. But today, when you look at the judiciary, you find that they've also been caught up in the same crisis that the legislative arm has, the executive arm has. And cases is so easy to even determine and say, this case will go this way, and this one will go. There were days in the judiciary, nobody would have known I'm winning a case. Nobody would have known that this case will go this way, that I am able to craft and do these things. But you see, we keep on blaming the judiciary alone, and especially the judges. But it is time also, and that is something I know most of us are trying to speak to the CJ and say, look, it is time you also look at the clerks within the courts. It is time you look at those who do research when cases come in, because the judges will always follow a certain script where the researchers have done their research, and you are able now to look at the case the way it is. The other challenge we are facing in judiciary, and that's why we are not setting the agenda, is that people outside now, some of us decided to, and when I say some of us, the politicians, we decided to politicize that process. And after we politicize the process, then we start blaming again the judiciary. Then having said that, now let us move to the other, and it's not just the politicians. All sides. When we look at a judge, we've forgotten they got there with merit. So we look at the judge based on maybe my tribe, and so when he gives a judgment that is a bit biased to one political side, we feel, oh, even if it was right, we still criticize. And yet you can see the judgment, whether you like it or not, would have gone that route, and regardless whether the judge is from which political, and you know the judiciary at that time, they always say they are not politicized, but people perceive and look at them based on where they have come from and where what is the political angle on that side. That is something as Kenyans we need to change and start appreciating that a judge in court will give you justice, not based on your political affiliations, but based on what is fact and right. Now, I'll give an example of 2017. So 2017, we get a nullification for the presidential candidate. And we look at that, and the judiciary tells us, you have to go back and do certain things to come back and do properly that presidential election. But then you remember again, there was a judge that comes in one day before that, comes in and he says, as much as we have been given this, you must follow this process. Now, people will not want to read the script to the end. We have become a country where, if I'm reading the Constitution, I want to read where it says something that is rightful for a large, which is wrong. I always say, read the law from the first to the end. Read a judgment from the first to the end, and you will understand why the judge decided to say that. So to come and blame him or her and depict him to his tribal region, it becomes very difficult for us. So for us, as we move on as a country, what we want to see the CJ do, number one, the reforms that we are talking about, is that we look at different cases and we ask ourselves, there are cases where families have been in court for 30 years. Surely, if the judiciary is kind enough, family cases of land, of what, people who have lived together, it is something that you can put in arbitration and just tell them, go and sort yourselves out and bring me what you have agreed. That family will do its best to sort itself, but if you give them a leeway, today this brother comes in, when the other one dies, another one comes in. They play around until everybody becomes so vulnerable, so poor, yet their parents left them with an inheritance they could have shared. And those are some of the things we are telling the CJ. It is time we remove Kenyans who have been in a case for 30 years. We let them out of that pool. We are saying, if there are cases of corruption, surely you have decided there is a case of corruption. And you have said, and we can say, and by the way, it's just my suggestion. We need to come to the way the juries do in London or in the US, where if it's a murder case, the community is there. They saw you murder. I don't see why we can have lawyer 1, lawyer 2, lawyer 3. In a case where you imagine that was your neighbor. And you remember some of the young cases where we had young university students who just started now killing each other because of relationships. And yet we want to sit down and the judge will have to await. Those are the things we are telling the judges and the judiciary. It is not fair for any family to await that long. To imagine that I can just see this young man roving all over, and yet in the beginning we knew very well he did this. This crime was acted. I think that those are the things we are trying to say.
I hear you.
The judiciary has to change to set the pace properly.
I hear you.
And
I hear you,
one
Mheshimiwa.
thing that we need to ask ourselves is that as we move forward, are we willing to support the same judiciary? Because they need support. They need to see things move. We need to see everyone feeling that I belong to this country and I'm able to do what? To work together with the different arms of government, knowing very well how independent they are to each other, but appreciating that we can work together for the good of this country. And therefore, if we are really going to talk about the judiciary and setting that pace of the judiciary, I think the best we can do is to come out and ask ourselves, what do we want to see going forward? Yes, we've had many issues. We have had, even as government being told we don't respect orders, Parliament does not respect orders. So everyone in the country, in fact, does not respect orders. And it's why? Because people feel, if you have not done it, why would I do it? And it has to stop. We must come and agree, if there are orders, respect the orders. If this is what we feel is wrong, then let's call it wrong. And I always say, why our country sometimes you can see it going and dwindling is because we've stopped to appreciate there's something called wrong is wrong and right is right.
Morality.
And we can change and we can be able to agree that if I am one Kenyan who can say, when I've done wrong, I come out and just say, I have wronged. And people will well, yes, I know we are keyboard warriors. We will do the keyboard warrior, but at one point people will appreciate you always have a stand of coming out and saying, this one I have wronged. And you rectify it and people will appreciate. And I know Kenyans, one of the things about Kenyans, we have a resilience that takes care. I mean, we know how to say, let's move on. We agree with them now, let's move on. I think that's the most important thing. For a new judiciary, for us to see a judiciary that will appreciate the cases that we are talking about, gender-based violence, young women, adolescents, and these killings, all of them, we need to appreciate that we'll have to hold the hand and agree as Kenyans. Before I even go to corrupt the courts, and I accept that indeed I have wronged, yet I'm going to pay in the courts to get it right, which is also wrong.
Which is wrong, yeah. So it still ends up with the people, right?
Let the law come, let me face the law, and let me change to be better.
It still ends up with the people. We have to check our morality. I really like, Mheshimiwa, what you've actually just brought out. First of all, and I'll come back to Nerima. Right now, she's bringing together the youth serving organizations. What are you calling them to do? Are you calling them to be better clerks? So that, are you calling them to be better researchers? I know Charles has done a lot of work in research, but Nerima, what are you calling your youth to do? What are you calling us to do?
At the moment, we are organizing ourselves for a possible election. And I'm saying possible because we know that the youth are the most used and abused during that period. So if we have one space where we can come together and we have one common agenda as young people, it's important. And even when it comes to peace messaging and organizing. So yeah, we're calling on the youth to be better individuals than some of the examples that we've seen before us in our very own leadership. But also when it comes to the judiciary and in that aspect, interestingly, a lot of young people don't go to the courts. They don't. I have petitioned before. It is long, as Honorable Elachi has mentioned, and it's also expensive. It takes a lot of resources to do. So even the fact that we're able to do it, it means that you're on a privilege to be able to have access to a court. So that's also something that we need to recognize. Youth don't petition, they don't go to courts. Because it's expensive for the youth. And also not very accessible. I mean, when we're talking about in rural areas, judges, we already had how they complain in terms of lack of resources and funding. So how are they going to get to these people? People would go to the chief. Youth go to the chief at the village level. That is the person who is able to take care of disputes when we talk about family issues and family matters. Other than that, they don't look at the judiciary. Is that the case, Charles? I can see you agreeing. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
And now before I go back to our core theme on the judiciary and its supremacy, I'm doing something on women empowerment. in Busia County. And you see, this is a survey that is being orchestrated by FIDA, Kenya. So through my survey, you see, we are trying to locate which women groups exist in Busia County as such. Not just Busia. In fact, it's countrywide, but I'm based in Busia. But I'm through with it. What we want to investigate, or we are investigating, is this: do we have women-based organizations? Do we have CBOs, community-based organizations, that fight specifically for the rights of the girl child or the women in society? If that's the case, how are they fighting for the rights of the women in society?
So,
then,
Charles, I'm trying to find that. So where does the judiciary come in now?
That's why I said I wanted to add something.
Yeah.
We have got a very outstanding case where a girl actually is raped, no, two of them, twins, by their own father. They're manipulated. The case is in the court. It's now 6 months. It was mentioned. But then on the grassroots, the chief of the area colludes with whoever's that he knows, and actually the case has been suppressed. So it was until when I was doing the research that I said, no, however much this was to cost me, I'm upholding the case. And through me, I can assure you, and whoever that is listening to me, that the two girls are yet actually to receive their justice. Because I found out the case was there, but it was put under the carpet. But yet we had evidence. Imagine the case was mentioned. So when a case is mentioned, from the legal understanding, I assume it has to go further, and so that we have results at the end of the day. Great. Then back to now our agenda. I think let us not divorce our minds from it actually. When we're talking of the judiciary, let us talk about the Constitution. We cannot divorce the Constitution and the judiciary, and the courts, then finally the rule of law. How is the Constitution formed, for example? How do you have the leaders in the Constitution? That the Constitution or any supreme law of the land, how is it formed? People should understand, the public should understand that when the government is coming up with a document in the form of a Constitution, it means you have given them the powers to come with the Constitution. Meaning this, that
the power rests with the people.
This individual surrendered, every individual Kenyan surrendered his sovereign power to the committee of experts. Those are the leaders, to interpret the Constitution on their behalf. Meaning that at one moment, it was done through a consent, that at one moment, if the same people want to withdraw their sovereignty from the committee of experts, they have to do it. But how? They have to do it within the prospects of the law, of the Constitution. But then the question is, who is to interpret the Constitution to the people so that they do it according to the law? We come back to the who? To the judiciary, through the judges. So what I'm saying is that the three arms of government should be supreme, but I think I should give much credit to the judiciary. Why? Because we shall elect the parliamentarians. We shall they represent us. We shall elect the judiciary, the executive. But you see, the court is not elected by the people as such. That's why its role as a body is so paramount and supreme that we have to respect it. Why am I saying so? If we do not have that judge interpreting the Constitution as per the law or in the correct manner, then it means that you may be judged unfairly or fairly. That's why when today's Chief Justice, Honorable Lady Justice Martha Koome, I give her credit. She says, and I quote, please, and she almost cried, that the government should fund the courts. And Honorable Elijah has just announced that.
And we're coming back to the resourcing. Yeah? Let me read some of the comments from online, and one from Olaka from Facebook saying that, I like Malika's deep understanding of theory, sociological, of course. May choose to conveniently call it theory and political science. Insightful discussion nonetheless. And then there's Esther Kanini also from Facebook saying that it's an excellent discussion, let's keep going. Dennis Sifuna reminds us that actually what we have as at now is a perfect outcome of choice of the executive and its element to plant the seeds of dishonor to the judiciary. I think it goes to what Honorable Beatrice Elachi was saying earlier on. There is another Musa Kamusa saying that the question of social morality on the matters that come before the judiciary are such notable events in which the judiciary stood out. For example, the school uniform question, rape questions, and the election question. However, the executive has rubber-stamped their foot on judicial progresses in Kenya. And that is from Musa Kamusa from Facebook. And just getting from that social media, Philip, what do you think is the role of the of the executive in all this? Do you think it's supporting the judiciary in the way it should and the other arms of government?
Well, I don't think the executive is really giving the support that the judiciary needs, in the sense that, first of all, we have talked about disobedience of court orders. That really speaks to the fact that the executive does not really mind, does not even acknowledge the existence of the courts. Another thing that speaks to what you're asking me and what Honorable Elachi has touched on is the issue of funding the courts. If you look at even the current budget that was read out recently, you realize that the legislature has more money or has more resources compared to the judiciary. Yet, if you look at the the human resource that is required at the judiciary is actually more compared to the parliament. The employees at the parliament are less. In a nutshell, what I'm saying is the employees at the parliament are less than the employees at the judiciary. And that is why you see a lot of times we are talking about cases, backlogs, and so forth and so on. Another recent gesture where we saw that the executive is not really mindful about the judiciary is when His Excellency Uhuru, without really giving valid reason, refused to promote the judges. So that is also another instance where I can say the executive does not really mind the judiciary, because we wanted to promote these judges so that we can have enough human resources at the Court of Appeal. Currently, we have, before that their promotion, we had I think 13 judges, which was very thin. So now there are 20, if I'm not wrong. So the Court of Appeal was very thin in terms of human resources. You could see a lot of case laws. There are a lot of cases that are going to the Court of Appeal, but they don't have dates. There are no hearings because we had only, I think, 13 or 7 judges. So that is an instant where the executive is flexing its muscles to show the judiciary that indeed we are more powerful. You know, we can even refuse to appoint more judges. We can even underfund you. You understand? Because as I've said, if you look at the budget that has been appropriated to the judiciary, comparatively to other sectors of the government, the judiciary is actually underfunded. So it speaks to even the workers, the employees of the Judicial Service Commission. They don't have the perks that other arms of government enjoy. You understand? So that is one instant where I'm saying the executive is acting in a manner to suggest that they are in war with the judiciary. Another instance which I've clearly said is the disobedience of court orders. If you remember very well, there was an eviction of some informal settlers around Kariobangi. So these evictions actually there was a court order saying that those evictions should not take place, but they took place nonetheless. And so it means that even the perpetrators of those evictions, they were disregarding court orders. They were totally disregarding court orders. And that is also another instant where I can cite where the executive is not really taking into consideration what the role that the judiciary is playing. So for me, it is a challenge that the judiciary is facing. It is indeed a challenge. But the judiciary is there. I really appreciate what it is doing, despite the small resources, despite the big man syndrome that the executive is projecting. I mean, the judiciary is still doing, with the little resource that they have, they are doing perfectly well. Yep.
Let me come to Honorable Beatrice Elachi. Elachi, we have seen you on both sides. You have been in Parliament, you have been in the county as a speaker, and you've also seen you in courts. What do you think is the role of Parliament? What do you think is the role of executive? And I think right now, if I'm rightly so, you are part of the executive. What do you think is the role of the executive, and how can we help as the youth, as the common mwananchi? Is there anything we can do for that matter? Okay, as I get Honorable Beatrice, let me come back to Nerima. Nerima, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Yeah, we have seen even in Vision 2030, judicial strategic plan, they are looking for judicial fund. What is the role of the development partners in all this, and do you think is the right way to go if we can't get resources internally?
I don't think it's the right way to go, because we've already seen what it's done to civil society. Because right now at the moment, even if me as a person who's within that space is to come out and fight for particular rights or issues, everyone says, oh, they are donor funded, it's international interest, they don't have the public's interests at heart. So it's tainted activism in bad light in this country.
Okay.
So right now, the judiciary itself, the media, and all sorts of mechanisms, including the state, are painting a very dark image of the judiciary. Adding donor funding to that will make things worse. It will make it look like an external entity coming to influence the leadership of our country, and it's not belonging to the Kenyan people, which is a very risky place to be. Unfortunately, forget even the judiciary, even look at health itself. 90% of funding for our health comes from donor money. It's unfortunate. Even when you talk about access to birth control, and I'm saying that because young people, young women care about that sort of stuff. It's all donor funded, almost 100%.
Yeah.
It's not funded by the Kenyan government. So funding is an issue everywhere. I do know that the judiciary is working on organizing themselves.
Yes.
I've heard through the grapevine that they've even created a trust for themselves. And they are putting their monies there and trying to coordinate themselves and organize themselves. I think that's a good way to go in terms of finding ways for them to be sustainable without having to depend hand and mouth from the executive, really. Yeah, because otherwise they will not be able to have independence.
So what you're saying is that the judiciary needs to sort themselves out, and which
At
they
least,
are doing.
Yes, at least find other ways to sort themselves out, which they are doing. That I know.
Okay, fantastic. Charles, you've worked with the international donors, you've worked, what's your thought on this? Yeah.
Okay, domestic, what we call domestic policy is much influenced by the foreign policy, depending on the level of development a country is. I want to say Kenya is underdeveloped. Okay. Underdeveloped in the way that, from the democratic perspective, Kenya is really on a transition, on a reversal gear in terms of democratization process. Just to buy some thought from what she has said, external borrowing and the likes. It is not all about borrowing that we can actually achieve our agendas as a country. Let us not just bang everything on the judiciary and such. Yeah, we know its role, but what should we do as a country to get us out of these graves of poverty and dependency, dependence syndrome as such? I can give an example of 1994. Ahmadinejad, the Prime Minister of Iran, then one from Singapore, Malaysia, they visited Kenya. Okay. The best Moi gave them was a session on paper number 10, written by who? It's Tom Mboya. Because Moi was a capitalist. You see, this, it's not theoretical, but it's very practical. So when these fellas went back, the question they asked themselves was, who wrote this paper? And experts there told them it was a Kenyan, who by the name Tom Mboya. So from 1994, you read within the lines, Singapore, Malaysia, Iran, they were at the same level with Kenya. But then the question is, why is it that they are competing, the United States, the British, whatever, in terms of development? The question is implementation. That we say, no jokes, we are going to adhere the Constitution. When we say we are actually curbing corruption, let it be within the Constitution and adhered by the people. Today, my friend, I can assure you, if someone gets you into Singapore, I think it's one of the worlds. You may think you are in heaven, actually. So what we have to say is this. Why Kenya is lagging behind in terms of democratization, to an effect that now we do not have what we call political order, we have such organizations maybe lagging behind is because they are not resourced. Why are they not resourced? Kenya has got one of the best tax systems in Africa. I can assure you that. But you see, the kitty that has the cash goes to the little that have the powers in terms of government. So if we are able to fund such organizations, then they'll be able to act, to fight for the rights of the disadvantaged. But then the question is, how much, to what extent are they? You know, Kenya is very good at, from the face value, we start a policy, we aggregate the interest, then agenda setting. But when it comes to implementation, then the question is, are we animals not to implement? Why is it that in Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kagame will implement through autocratic means, but they achieve the end, the mean? Where is the question? The question is the culture of the people. The issue of the big man, as by the chief executives, the issue of this one belongs to me, that we have to get away from such a culture so that the funds should be located and allocated to the intended programs. To that end, we shall have a peaceful Kenya. But today, I can assure you, there's much that we have to do as far as corruption is concerned. The courts are not bad, the executive is not bad, the parliament are not. The problem is the corruption. That's a very big syndrome in the entire government of Kenya. Once we do away with it, then we are done. But then it goes back to the courts, which are, as you say, they are underfunded. So you tell me, we are in a limbo.
So we're coming back to that. So you have handled corruption, but we're coming back to corruption. I know, Philip, there's something you want to say about the role of the media in all this and highlighting the good things that the judiciary has done. But let me go back to the audience. I can see some hands there. Let me start at the very back. Just take the mic. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Mosa Kamosa, and I have listened through, and I think there are things which are coming out. One thing I would first bring is the backlog in the judiciary. Yeah, we're complaining that judiciary has not been funded. I think I'll just move this. Has not been funded enough and has not been given enough resources. But then you find somebody has a court case that stays for that years, and even after that years, they die, and then the case has not been resolved. You know, that is a question which Kenyans want to know why. Because if their justice is delayed, but then when a politician asks a case in court, they're given priority because they can pay money for them to get scheduled earlier. That is a problem where Kenyans do not fight. Because if they get justice, then they can get all the other amenities. If there's justice in every society, the other amenities can be able to be provided. Then number two is on the executive. The executive has really ruined the belief in systems in this nation. Because when a president really does not appoint judges as the law accords him the role to do that, then the people do not believe in him as an institution, because presidency is an institution and it's a symbol of national unity itself. So if the nation is not united by the executive, then even believing in the system of judiciary, then it becomes hard. Then number three is the independence institution. Now, judiciary is independent. We cannot say the executive is really stamping their foot as much because they are independent. Now, have we seen the independence of judiciary itself? Then the other thing is the director of public prosecution. They delay. They don't bring. Bring prosecution in court enough, and then the cases stay in court for long. The DCI do not come, they don't work together with the Director of Public Prosecution. So there's the courts cannot even run without these guys bringing the real matter on the court. So they have been failing the courts as much. And then also the parliament. You know, for example, the last 2 months, the parliament has passed laws on beekeeping and on a food security bill, which is very sensitive, on Irish potatoes, where they are saying farmers must have licenses to produce potatoes. It is a very, what would I say? You know, it's really, as a farmer personally, I feel, ignored. But the court will implement that rather, and then the people will say the courts are doing something wrong. But then it starts from the parliament, which is also an independent institution in our nation.
All the three arms of government have to work together.
They have to work together. Exactly. And then you give us the people the right thing they require.
the justice and the development they require.
Okay. Let me get three more. Just hand over the mic to just three more, and then I will move to Honorable Beatrice to answer this. Because, Mheshimiwa, I know you have been part of the
county, you've been part of the executive now, and I would really like to hear your comments on this. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Kimani, and I'm happy to contribute to this insightful discourse. Mine is just a commentary in terms of the performance of the judiciary. And I feel that, number one, the judiciary has indeed been so much helpful in terms of promoting the national agenda. And I speak to this to the extent that on the issues relating to national revenue, where there is a disconnect between Parliament and the Senate, the judiciary, actually the Supreme Court stated that in the event of any inconsistencies that delays the devolvement of funds to the counties, what we have to do then is that let there be 25% allocation to the counties prior even to dispute resolutions. Now, because we have a situation where Parliament and Senate, there's a clear disconnect, and none of them wants actually to pass the bill because they feel like we are getting little more than we deserve. And that, in turn, the effect of that is that we have county assembly employees not being paid for a period of 3 months. We have infrastructure projects that are not yet being done. And what the judiciary came in place and said, hey, wait a minute. First, even before, as you fight through this, ensure that 25% of the previous national allocation goes in first and cures all those inconsistencies, then we can come solve this dispute. And another issue that I would love to say is that the judiciary is not the duty bearer in terms of all these issues to do with corruption, to do with other social vices in the event of, for instance, defilement. We have other stakeholders that needs to play their part. For instance, if the Constitution gives us the right to vote. You see, there's a manner that you are expected to exercise that right. It is presumed that even as you exercise that right, you'll vote in leaders of integrity. You'll vote in leaders that are able to push an economic agenda forward. But you see, when people exercise that right, not within the principles that it was intended to, we tend to push that we tend to push that burden for the judiciary to cure. If the people themselves, and they have donated that part to the judiciary, have failed to actually meet the standard that is expected of the governance, then as a judiciary, being an arm of government, there is only very little it can do. And some of these...
what you're saying is that we're putting too much burden on the judiciary.
Exactly. We are putting too much burden. If we were, for instance, my brother here has referred just to Singapore. If we have in place the people actually required to be income of Singapore, then it should be expected that they vote in leaders that actually have that share in that particular vision. No, we do not expect the judiciary to start barring people from running into office, whereas you as a citizen, you can even exercise that right even without spending a coin going to the judiciary. So I would really want us to look in those aspects of life.
Let me get to Keter,
and then I'll just hear from the two ladies, and then I bring it back to the panel. Keter, very briefly, don't give examples.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Ken Keter, and what I would like to talk about is that as we talk and as we look at the judiciary, we need to realize that the well-being of this country or of any nation at large depends on how our leaders behave. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about leaders, it includes those in the executive, those in the judiciary, and all the arms of government. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I think that it all narrows down to an individual, the character of an individual. Is it St. Thomas or is it St. Augustine of Hippo who speaks about the city of man and the city of God? Mm-hmm. And again, in his writings, he says that in the city of man, the people and the leaders operate and are guided by their own desires, right? And in the city of God, the people, I wouldn't want to go into religion, but yeah, in the city of God, the people are guided by moral principles, right? Therefore, looking at the judiciary as an institution, the engine of this institution is that individual, the Chief Justice. What is his or her character, right? So we now need to go back to the society and say, look, how are we bringing up those people or the children that are projected to be tomorrow's leaders, right? So that what Honorable Elachi said comes into picture. That in those days, a child was a property of all of the society, and if you are in the wrong, anybody would punish you. What I'm trying to say is this: that as we look at the judiciary, we need to go back to the ethics of our society, because we are not just we do not want to be parochial and look at our era. We also want to look at the future. 200 years, all of us will have gone. That's a fact. And therefore, how will Kenya be at that time? And so we need to set these basics,
right,
like literally from the word go.
Okay.
In our societies, in our religious institutions, whether we are Muslims or Christians or whatever we are. And another thing, and I would seek the indulgence of Wakili.
Okay.
How is it that we have a case in court, a corruption case, that money allocated to a dam somewhere in West Pokot were diverted to something else? And we have been having the case for like 5 years now. The money, if Wakili is the cabinet secretary of finance, you are in charge of that docket. Now, the money allocated to that particular dam was, you signed the check, I don't know how it operates, and now you forwarded it to someone who was supposed to be in charge of whether those who got the tenders or whoever it is. Now, we just follow the process. Okay, Wakili, you are the one in charge of this money. Ulipatia nani?
So we follow
yes.
Until the last
ulipatia nani?
Gets there.
Wewe ukapatia nani? It's that simple. We really do not need to take a lot of years looking at something that we just need to know. Ilitoka hapa ikaenda wapi. So I think we sometimes the judges and the judiciary complicates these things. Yes.
Let me ask you. Are you removing that burden from the judiciary?
Yes.
Now to the prosecution?
Yes.
So what you're saying is that the prosecution should actually do their job.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Thank you, Ketero. Let me hear from the ladies back there. Just two of them for now, and then I'll come back to that. So very quickly and very briefly, put in your comments.
I will be very brief. And as we all know, at the moment in time, we do not have an active opposition. And the only other hope we had is the civil society, right? And so now I would like to have an input from our panelists. Now that we are having restrictions on our freedom of expression, association, and assembly, how do we go on from this?
Okay.
If something is wrong, like just recently the RPP got us into political parties, which we never registered for. What happens to the citizens in such a case?
Okay, thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Emma Mungute, and having heard what everyone has shared, I'd like us to think about the topic of the day from a different angle, where we should know that there is no progress that can be achieved by taking the victim mentality. So, responsibility, first of all, starts with us. And are we helping the judiciary, or are we helping ourselves if we are not upholding law? When we are engaging in corruption, or when we buying justice, yeah, what are we doing, to ourselves? So as Nerima said, that in Kenya, whoever has money has justice or the law on his side, and this can be interpreted in so many ways. They're able to afford, lawyers and stuff like that. But then we need to sincerely ask ourselves, why are things the way they are? Yeah, and is bureaucracy really helping us? Yeah. Also, don't we need to appraise different cases differently? As Ken put it, we have so many cases, in court for years and years. Then, what justice are we doing to, the victims? Because justice delayed is an injustice in itself. Yeah. And in lawmaking, could we have everyone on board? We have talked about what culture does to, the people and stuff. Could we also have psychologists on board? Could we have the people on board? Because the law of Kenya states that an adult is an 18-year-old. Psychologists, however, state that, a person's brain is not developed until the age of above 25 years old. It is really disheartening, and I'm sorry, Wakili, to have, people who are educated, but then we are not questioning what we are learning. Is it serving us? When he was talking about people lowering the age of consent to 16, let's ask ourselves, is it for business? Is it serving us? Who are furthering this agenda? And is it working for us? And that's why I'm saying it's our collective responsibility, that it starts with us, from the smallest unit, the family. What are we as parents teaching, the people who we are mandated to take care of our children? And then it's a ripple effect now back to the judiciary. Yeah? And I'd like to state finally by saying that let's not look at symptoms, let's look at the root causes of issues. Instead of firefighting and asking ourselves, how much fire extinguisher should I buy just in case a fire erupts? Let's ask ourselves, how do we stop this fire, and how do we stop it for good? Thank you.
I love the discussion from the floor, and I like the insights that you've actually just brought to the fore. Let me go back to Honorable Beatrice Elachi. If you can hear us, what's your take on all this, now that you have been both at the National Assembly, in the Senate, and also in the counties, and now just from a meeting with the women? Okay, as she gets that, let me come back to Philip. Philip, what should the judiciary be handling now? What are some of the issues that have come from the floor that you want to address based on these challenges? We have heard of restriction of movement, we have heard of COVID, and all this. What do you think the judiciary should be focused on now so that they can set this agenda?
Well, I've heard from the audience, and one thing that really comes out, I would like to answer Ken first and say, but even before I go to the audience, there is something that my sister Nerima has mentioned, and I would want to answer. When you say that the judiciary inafaa kujipanga, it's supposed to source funds for itself, really that is against the tenets of the Constitution, because if you read chapter 12 on public resource expenditure, basically this is an arm of a government. It doesn't have kujipanga. The judiciary deserves equitable distribution of resources just as much as the legislature and the executive deserve. So when it comes to budget allocation, it is the mandate of the Constitutional and Legal Affairs Committee at the Parliament level to allocate a budget for the judiciary. So the judiciary haiwezi kujipanga. lazima the judiciary is an arm of the government, and it has been provided so in the constitution that it deserves equal amount of funds as much as the judiciary, the executive and the legislature. Now, to go back to the question that Ken has posed, the issue, I presume you are referring to the issue of Kimwarer Dam, which has been in courts for a very long time. I want to say that our judicial system is one that we call adversarial system. Adversarial system is where you provide your evidence, the other party provides his evidence, and then we have an umpire, a referee, who now determines purely on the evidence that have been adduced. So if you remember well, the DPP, Nurdin Hassan, said that we don't have enough evidence to prosecute these people. The DPP, the investigating officer of that particular scandal, was not able to gather enough evidence to sustain a charge for those people, and that is why it has taken that long. As for the cases that have stuck in the courts for even 30 years, as someone has mentioned, I really don't think it is the judiciary which should be faulted for that. I will repeat here and say that if you don't bring evidence in a court of law, and those are the words of Maraga, if you remember well, he said that if you don't bring enough evidence, we are not going to force you. We are not an inquisitorial jurisprudence. It is unlike in France or other jurisdictions where the court comes in and says, we want to find out exactly what killed this person. I'm just giving an example. Here is different. Here, we just have a judge who sits and waits for both parties to produce evidence. Whoever will have more evidence, the court will now decide in his favor or lack of it thereof. You understand? So it is not the courts to follow up on certain cases. It is actually the parties to put up efforts and ensure that they have enough evidence to sustain their charge, or if it is a civil case, to sustain that. To see to it that their cases have gone to the completion. Another thing that has emerged from the audience is that the issue of I keep going to this issue because indeed the judiciary has played a role in talking about that particular question of consent. The issue of consent really, I'm not here to state that I support that the age should be lowered. In other jurisdictions like France and even the United States, we have the age of consent being 14, or even another 16 in the US, and France I think it is 14. So really it is just a discussion that we are just toying around it, and I can see Nerima yeah. And you see, again, I like to go back to the moderator. You see, protect me because I can see the river is on my neck. You see, there is the aspect of practical life, all right? There is an aspect of practical life. I will not lie to you. In our village where I come from, ladies were married as early as even 12 years, and they were very physically, you know. So those are even my grandmother. I spoke with my I'm just saying the things that I believe you brought me here so that I can air my opinion. You see, I had a privilege to speak with my late grandmother. May her soul rest in peace. And I asked her, we really had a very liberal discussion. And I remember her telling me that at the age of 12, she had already gotten, I think, the firstborn. So these are things that we must, in as much as we look at the law and say, oh, we should not bring this feminist activism inside it. We should just look at it from a practical perspective and say, well, if this lady can get a child at the age of 13, I think this is something.
That's one way of looking at it, Philip.
Exactly.
What I'm trying to establish now is that your personal view, or is that actually the view of the judiciary?
I'm saying yes. That is also the view of the judiciary, and I started this conversation by saying You can easily do a Google search. Google is your friend. You can just Google search the ruling of Justice Said Chitembwe. And even if you remember when he was doing the interviews for the Court of the CJs, he was taken to task about that particular decision that he made. And he said, you know, at that circumstance, you have to look at this case on a case-to-case basis. The lady in question, yeah. So it is really...
I think you have really brought, and I like how you brought it to the fore.
Yeah.
That actually the judiciary has a role to play
It
in
has,
setting the
and
agenda.
it has already played that
and
role
it has already played
through that decision where someone who had sexual contact with a 13-year-old was convicted.
Okay.
You
Let me
understand?
go to
I mean,
Honorable Beatrice.
acquitted, sorry. Acquitted, he was acquitted.
He was acquitted.
Yeah.
Let me go to Honorable Beatrice Elachi. Elachi, can you hear us? And this time we'll give you, I think...
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, the role of the judiciary in setting the agenda. And you can hear how heated it is in this room. My audience wants to walk out.
It's so heated because number one,
Uh-huh.
I know we'll agree in other jurisdictions, yes, we have 16 years, yes, we have 14 years. But you see, in Kenya, we say you have an ID card at 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are saying, when you are doing it, do it knowing very well you are responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Being responsible is that you can be taken to court at any given time. So for me, the most important thing we need to be asking ourselves is that, and I think we were trying to talk about how do we now improve?
Yes.
How do we want to see the judiciary go forward?
Yes.
The Sexual Offences Bill, Joki's bill, is there. It has been guiding us. It has been able to give a framework, a legal framework, especially when you're dealing with cases of sexual violence. But then now, it's not just sexual violence. I think we are talking to the judiciary in a very broad way. And I remember one of the participants saying, why is it that I have to wait for until 18 years for my, 30 years or 18 for my case? And that is the question, that the judiciary must reform that. And I have said, you can't wait when we have people who have lived as a family, kill each other because of maybe land or inheritance. Then they come and reach a point and you're like, what else? I think at that time, at that point, the judiciary should now step in and say, this is a fine that has been with us. We cannot allow this to move on. And move out as a family, sort out yourself, bring me that consent, and we agree that this is your agreement on how you're moving forward to care maybe property of your parents or your grandparents or whatever. That is one. And then the other issue that we need to be asking ourselves, and especially in when we say, when we look at how the cases are being filed, I agree with Charles, yes. Sometimes when you put in your case and you know very well it will not have good evidence, definitely, it will be a case that will be thrown out. But can we do that? I know in the judiciary today, we have a way where we go for preliminaries, where things are put together first, and then we agree on how to move on. At that time, is there a way at those preliminaries, we can agree that this case does not hold water, and therefore can be thrown out. But you see, again, somebody will feel, because our constitution is very clear, you must have, were you able to give him a fair hearing? That's the question. So our constitution also has ensured you must give every person fair hearing. That fair hearing comes now in with the judge asking himself a question, that if the DPP has stayed for long without bringing evidence, surely then the DPP should be put on blast and be told, we've been with this case for 2 years, people are waiting. Let me give an example. Obato and Sharon and all those cases. It's just an example. Honestly, how many years will the Sharon family await justice? You see, and it's a very painful process for the mother, for everyone. So we can say there's some cases, and I'm just giving an example of some cases where you would feel, I don't think you have done right on this. I don't think you have been able to do justice to, and even Kenyans would see and they feel, no, this one would have been done better. Yeah. So I think that is what we are saying. So for me, going forward, I pray and I wish to see a judiciary that is a bit responsible to the citizen.
Fantastic.
Yes, you will tell me they have been they are not funded properly. True, they are not funded properly. But at the same time, we always say that you look at what is best. With the little resources you have, you can see what is best and how you move. But it is also clear that indeed we need to fund them. We need to put them to a match. I can see the DPP's office has quite a number of prosecutors, and therefore we have to do the same. Magistrates must be there, because you can't have many prosecutors, but you don't have the magistrates. So we need to employ more magistrates so that we see if we have more magistrates, if we bring the courts to to Mwananchi the way the CJ is trying to think, will it work? I believe it will work. I believe it will reduce some of the family cases that we see. And there are those cases where we are saying, if it's a family case, it's a case that you need to resolve very fast. Reasons are, it is so easy to put that family in a situation where they can hurt each other for a very long time.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a fantastic way of putting the judiciary to task and actually just giving us an insight into the future. And let me come back to Nerima, and as we conclude. Nerima, what's your counterintuitive, half crazy prediction about the judiciary in the next few years? What would you like to see in the judiciary? Maybe in a minute or so, yeah.
Yeah. This is my closing remark.
Yes.
I would have never imagined that the Chief Justice would be a woman.
Okay.
So for me already, that's transformative in itself. Hopefully we'll begin to see cases such as what has happened in South Africa.
Okay.
Because of contempt of court, our former president has been, sentenced. 6 months. Yeah, to prison. Those are the sort of things that I'm hoping to see.
Okay. Okay. And what about your youth?
On youth?
Yeah.
Being able to even trust in the judiciary. I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, and youth actually seeing it as a mechanism to be able to protect themselves with the courts. They don't even, courts doesn't even come close, the judiciary doesn't come close. Their first interaction with Usaidizini, the chief, or church.
Okay. So at least we bring the judiciary to the common Mwananchi and especially the youth for them to access. Okay, Charles.
Yes.
How are you predicting, especially now that next year is an election year, how are you predicting the judiciary to be?
Okay, before I even conclude, let me help my brother at the end. You talked and you people agreed that the parliament and the executive and the judiciary must work together.
Okay, okay.
That will be what we call political suicide.
Okay.
The parliament has to be independent, the judiciary has to be independent, and the executive too has to be independent for the concept of the checks and the balances to prevail. That's the only way we shall move on. But as far as next year's elections are concerned, I think the common denominator will prevail. Political culture of Kenya is still the way it was, unless we have done away with the concept of ethnicity, politics of belonging, whom do I belong to and the likes, then we are doomed. We are not going far. We shall have elections. But my wish is that we have credible and transparent elections. But then to just put the curtains down, that elections may be free and fair. Democracy may begin with elections, but it does not end with elections. It ends with the observation of the rule of law. To an extent, that the voting, people may vote freely and fairly, the casting of the ballot may be free and fair, the counting may be free and fair, but my brothers and sisters, the announcing may not be free and fair. And if that one is not free and fair, then it means the rule of the law of the land is not observed, and that election will not be credible. So the final thing I can say is that let us observe and adhere to the rule of the law as stipulated for in the independent Constitution of the Republic of Kenya.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Philip, we are broadcasting this on social media. You have done a lot of work on media. What's your concluding remarks, especially on the role of the media in the judiciary and how we actually portray the judiciary?
I think first I want to say my parting shot is that we must all endeavor to support the judiciary, because right now the judiciary is playing the role of the opposition and also the role of the civil society. As for the media, I would want to fault the media because the media is not assisting the judiciary. Why? Because it is not uncommon to see two people being brought on television, for example, to discuss legal issues. And some of these people, actually, when you look at them, they are not tacticians in that area. So they are not able to look at the legal issue from a contextual perspective. So you will find a person from Camp A being pitted against a person from Camp B. All right? So they are discussing legal issues, judicial issues, on a live television interview, but then they are just discussing for the heck of it. They are not actually contextualizing the issues. You would find someone saying, Mr. Odunga, Justice Odunga, as a vendetta against President Uhuru, for example. And that one even applies to the print media. It is not uncommon to see newspapers saying that Justice Joel Ngugi has a revenge mission against Honorable Raila, stuff like that. So you see, this media as is bringing a narrative for the shock value, but not necessarily to enlighten the people about the role of judiciary, really. And as I finish, I just want to say that I've said that the media is not helping things. As I finish, I want to say that my watershed moment in this country as far as the role of the judiciary is concerned is in 2017, when the Supreme Court nullified the presidential election. It really opened the floodgates in other countries in Africa, because immediately after the nullification of the 2017 elections, we saw Malawi also following the same route, and we have also seen other instances where decisions have been made touching on the executive, and these are serious decisions. Remember, Kenya was the first country to annul elections. It has never been done before. So, in a nutshell, the judiciary that we have is very progressive. It is one that deserves support, and it is one that deserves our attention. So, let us help the judiciary the best way we can.
Discussions, so that we understand what does our society needs. This time we're focusing on the judiciary, and next time maybe we'll be focusing on something else, but it has become very, very clear that as youth we need to continue having this discussion. Other comments from Facebook, Maureen Wanyonyi says good conversation. Pagabet Alfred says that Philip, you're on point. The situation must first be examined before judgment. And Kimutai Abraham says, very good explanation on the law regarding sexual offenses, corruption, and the other factors that we discussed. So it is an honor. It has been an honor to host you, so thank you so much. To my audience, again, we look forward to continuing with this discussion. Thank you to our sponsors, CAS, Harry Heights, and Annex Entertainment. Till next time, thank you so much. Hey.